Shadiversity.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and in this video we're going to be talking about sword frogs, which is this thing I'm wearing right here that is holding my sword. Now, in the past I have said that this type of sword attachment to oneself or one's belt was not accurate, it's not historical, but some of you keen viewers actually mentioned in the comments in the last time I actually referred to this, saying, actually, Shad, I've seen something like that is rather historical. And when hearing your comments, that prompted me to look into it a bit further, a proper deep dive, actually scouring the internet for any reference or representation of this type of sword attachment. And you know what I found? That I was wrong. These things, well, there's a bit of a caveat. They are historical, but not in the exact way that my frog is being worn or designed right here. But the concept of what this does very much existed in history with a more stylized and honestly better looking way. So I got to give credit to you guys because I learned so much from you. And especially in this case, you were the ones who prompted me to look into this further. So first thing, the name. Sword frog is one kind of name, but it seems like there might be a better name for this type of sword carrying thing, and that is a sword carriage, which makes a lot of sense. Now, the reason why I've always kind of opted for this, thing, when wanting to attach my swords to them, was the convenience. It was really, really useful. Do you see how easily it was to just take off my sword and then slip it back in? And when it's in, it's actually attached really securely, or securely enough. There are other kind of sword, attachment methods where you can strap the sword with a belt coming forward and then a belt coming back, which stops it swinging around. But you shouldn't then assume that all sword attachments to one's belt should be secure. There is a lot of medieval artwork showing many different types of ways a sword was attached to a belt, sometimes in a lot of detail, and the ones that we see, they would not be very secure. They would flap around quite a lot, especially ones that were hung from a baldric, which is a belt over the shoulder. So this one right here that I'm wearing is actually secure enough, much better, and it's so convenient, particularly when I need to remove my sword and put it back in. Now, in what situations would I find myself where I'd want to actually take off my sword? The sacrilege, right? Sitting. Now, of course you can sit with a sword when it's attached to your belt. Here is a chair. And for the sake of science, I shall now demonstrate to you my skill and talent in sitting, but specifically, sitting with a sword on my belt. See, got to be careful of the back end hitting the chair, so one must probably put it up like that. And the technique is to stand in front of the chair, bend thy knees, and sit. Voila! Now, some of you particularly astute viewers might be noticing something. The sword is touching the ground and pushed it up a little bit as I sat. There is a couple of circumstances when this highly practiced and skillful technique that I just demonstrated wouldn't work too well. For instance, if I was sitting on a bench and there was no place for the sword to move behind when I sit, that would cause a problem. So, of course, one can sit with a sword. I don't need you now. You may go.
My ancestors are smiling at me, Imperial. Can you say the same?
Of course one can sit with a sword attached, but it does hit the ground, and there are some seats in which it wouldn't work. For instance, a seat with armrests and such. And so when I find myself in those positions, you need to remove the sword if you want to sit, lounge, or just get comfortable, or just sitting in a bench or other type of things. And when you need to remove your sword, having a convenient way where you can just slip it out is really useful. Not having to fiddle with belts and unstrap it and get it around and things like that. And so for those reasons, I saw that this was just really useful, which is why I still wore it, even under the assumption that it was not historically accurate. So the sword frog that I'm wearing right now is actually made for LARP swords. Indeed, I bought it from a LARP place. Was it Kalamazoo? I think it might have been Kalamazoo that I bought it. And the reason, it's made to be particularly wide to accommodate the broad or fat, foamed blades of LARP swords, and they just slip in nicely there. But this betrays something that would be incorrect about this type of sword attachment method. And it's that I'm putting a bare blade through this leather carriage. And I'm going to use sword carriage now because I like that term better than sword frog. And in actual fact, if you look up sword carriage, you will generally find some better hits and images of what I'm talking about here. So for LARP, these type of things are very, very useful. And I wonder if I can even, this is a big one. This would represent a war sword is what I'm trying to say. It's a little, tight on the thing. It fits in. It's a bit tight, about there. And okay, yeah, it even works for really big swords. So as I was saying, if you were to put a unsheathed sword through one of these, well, the blade will cut the leather, eventually slicing it right in two, and that kind of defeats the purpose. No, sword. It's now it's stuck. Okay, maybe this one is too big. Sword carriages were always meant to be used with that very same method I was demonstrating before, with a sheathed sword. So the blade is already protected, and you put the whole sheath, sword and all, through the carriage, and there it is, sitting securely and effectively to be removed and put back in whenever you need to. So, where do these appear in history? Primarily the Renaissance, and they are more represented to be used with rapiers in a different, more fashionable way than I'm wearing here. And here are some of the references. And as you can see, the loops, there's individual loops made of individual buckles and straps, so they can be loosened and tightened to fit whatever sword scabbard you want. And the rapier in its scabbard would be slipped through and hang very fashionably there. These would be attached through individual baldricks, so you could just put it over your shoulder and have it there, or attached to one's belt. And not only do we have artwork showing these carriages, we have surviving examples as well. So these absolutely existed sword carriages, but as you'll see, they're done in somewhat of a different style than the one I'm wearing here, but the concept, the utility of what is being seen is identical, okay? This is very much a sword carriage, just not perfectly accurate to how the ones we saw in the past. Now, if there is so much utility and usefulness to this kind of a sword attachment method, it would make sense that some equivalent of, these sword carriages exist in the medieval period. So I went to medieval art and searched. I searched and searched, searched and searched some more. And you know what I found? Yes, some historical references of close equivalents, or at the very least, sword attachment methods that are providing the exact same utility, even if it's not in the same style as the Renaissance ones that I have shown just there. So have a look at some of these sword attachments in the artworks I'm presenting right now. As you can see, they are a simple kind of loop, okay? A round little loop attachment hanging from these men's belts, where a sword with its scabbard has been either slipped through or it was actually wrapped around intentionally. But even if it was wrapped around, okay, you would be able to slip it off that loop and remove the sword and scabbard from the belt, particularly this one right here. So these images, in my opinion, represent the equivalent of the sword carriage in the medieval period, showing that absolutely there was a type of sword carriage in the medieval period, and that the concept, the idea, the utility of having an attachment where you could just take the sword out and slide it back in definitely existed. Now, what you will notice, there is of course not a direct equivalent to this, but what this means about my particular sword carriage here is that it is historically plausible. Would I go so far to say historically accurate? Only if I actually saw one that was almost like a one-to-one thing. It's like, that's 100% historically accurate. But because the utility, the very concept of what this is doing existed, it actually wouldn't be out of place. And if I was to switch over to something like this, a much more humble and simple sword carriage, well, suddenly this one is actually far more historically plausible to the point of dancing along the line of historically accurate than the one I'm currently wearing, and it does exactly the same thing. So there you go, sword carriages, or sword frogs, as they're more commonly called these days. They existed historically in a more kind of stylized way in the Renaissance, and there is absolutely precedent for them in the medieval period. So, I'm making this video to set the record straight in what I have said in the past, and also present some new, very interesting information to you. Thank you for watching. I do hope you have enjoyed, and of course, I hope to see you again. So until that time, do you see what happened? It came loose. And I have no idea when it came loose. So, might be half the video with me having a loose pauldron. How embarrassing! I blame my wife, she tied it, it's all her fault. Honey, could you come and retie it for me?